Good morning, good afternoon, guys. It is Saturday, the 10th of September. I'm going to read you a quick article, again by Hugo Salinas Price from the Platter.com website. This was published on the 29th of August 2016, and it's a follow-on from my gold and silver revaluation videos. This is the guy who has some great insight, quite likely some amazing connections. So it starts off with a speech by Hugo Salinas Price, and there's a few paragraphs, guys, of how he talks about scientific methodhood, which, if you've watched my previous videos, I have covered, and it is a bit of a repeat on that. So to save time, I'm just going to go straight into where the main article starts, and it's here. At present, we see that the combined might of Russia and China will have to force the US to give up its policy of projecting military might around the world. The US will have to stop dreaming of world domination. As US military influence around the world begins to recede, more questions will be asked about the convenience of the world's monetary system based on the fiat dollar, which up to now has been omnipotent. Therefore, we shall begin to see more decision regarding a return of a gold standard, the only monetary system that does not require military force for its implementation, because gold is money and substance, politically neutral and therefore conducive to peace among nations. We do not know just how the world will return to the use of gold money. It will possibly take place in the midst of disorder. In whatever way it takes place, the return to gold implies very painful changes in all the national economies around the world, because the use of gold will put heavy locks on the ability of governments everywhere to return to debt. And when governments are no longer able to take on debt in ever increasing quantities, the world as we know it will have vanished. It is important to notice that very close connection that has existed in our times between this behaviour of humanity in every sense and the world's monetary policy since it abandoned the gold standard. As a result of the excessive financial costs of the First World War in 1914, that war broke out in August, and most people in Europe thought it would not last beyond December, because the governments at war would run out of money. However, the belligerent parties unexpectedly resorted to printing paper money to pay expenses, and that was the beginning of the end for the gold standard. In the next few years, disappearance of the gold standard had relatively modest effects because the world's central banks had to hoard gold as reserves, and this exercised a breakup upon the expansion of credit. However, on August the 15th, 1971, when the US unilaterally defaulted upon the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944, holding gold ceased to be important to the central banks. What became necessary and important was for them to hold dollars, irredeemable in gold, as reserves. At that moment, American policy was liberated from the need to restrict credit in dollars for fear of losing gold to its creditors. Then ensuing unrestricted expansion of credit on the part of the US led to an orgy of the world's expansion of credit, that is to say, of debt, which today is expressed in conceivably enormous numbers. The expansion of debt, on the one hand, means on the other hand the expansion of money, paper or digital money in corresponding quantities in the whole world. Thus the fact is that humanity has lived for the past 45 years in a state of drunkenness based on debt. The governments of the world have turned into wild spenders because there have been no limit to their ability to go into debt, an ability that was strictly limited under the gold standard and at least partially limited under the Bretton Woods Agreement while they lasted. The ability to go into debt affects the behaviour of a human being. A habitual debtor spends until he goes into full bankruptcy. His behaviour in the meantime becomes disorderly. The governments of the world in the past 45 years have behaved like habitual debtors, and their unlimited spending has changed the behaviour of humanity. There is a disorder in personal behaviour, a shameless flaunting of vice. Family life has broken down because of the father, who used to be the support of the family, has lost his authority. His wife now has the opportunity of leaving the home to work, and she has her own income. The children can ignore paternal authority and can live idle at home instead of having to go out and get work. In the world today, there is no longer any social consensus regarding the appropriate way to dress, a clear manifestation of the social transformation suffered by humanity in the last 45 years. How many hundreds of millions of youngsters have their own costly cell phones? How many hundreds of millions of auto jams on the streets, the cities of the world? How many millions of electronic screens in homes keep humanity in hypnotic state? The ample credit that is offered to acquire these things originates in the capacity of governments to go into debt and rain money upon their populations. Consider also the boom in the world tourism. Millions of tourists wander idly around the world every year. Is the world really much wealthier than it was in 1971? No, the world is not much wealthier. We have the impression that the world is far wealthier than it was 50 years ago, and that economic scarcity is a thing of the past, because all governments of the world borrow continuously, and with their policy of spending, they are in fact subsidised leisure, and no one thinks about the debt that is piling up. Government policies of social spending, which have plenty of political support, are funded by the ever-increasing indebtedness by governments, and they have the effect of reducing individual responsibility. In other times, personal charity alleviated the suffering of the less fortunate in this life. Today, government spending aims to keep everybody comfortable. The fate of the habitual debtor is bankruptcy. The same outcome inevitably awaits our world. The uncounted centuries humanity lived in fear of hunger. God said to Adam when he expelled him from paradise, quote, "You will earn your bread with the sweat of your brow." End quote. During the last half century, humanity has been repeatedly losing the fear of hunger because governments that spend borrowed money have offered all sorts of monetary assistance so that people will not have to earn their bread with the sweat of their brow. The day is approaching when we are going to wake up with an inevitable world financial crack. What are those accustomed to living off the government spending, either directly or indirectly, which includes practically all of us, going to do? Only the Aborigines of the Amazon, of New Guinea, or the Borneo are going to live through the period without suffering. Unfortunately, a good number of more on planet Earth will feel pain or even suffer death. World debt is documented in bonds, which are contracts that promise payment of debt, with regard to the wealthy that hold large quantities of bonds. When the crack arrives, their bonds will become worthless pieces of paper. That is the nasty surprise that is coming for the wealthy. The policies that could make of Mexico a strong and prosperous country have been well known for ages. A government that collects low taxes, a government that operates under a budget without borrowing to increase its expenditures, a government that does not burden the population with excessive regulations, free trade, solid currencies, legal safeguards for private property, public works of infrastructure limited to a government budget. Such was the policy, generally speaking, of our President Gustavo Díaz Ordaz, 1964 to 1970. When his term in office ended, Mexico's foreign debt was $4 billion, and our central bank, Banco de Mexico, held that amount in cash on its balance sheet. It is hard to imagine that we shall ever again enjoy such a policy. Consequently, Mexicans are facing a rather somber future, and this goes for the world, guys. Forget just a Mexico quote, this is the world. In view of the great chaos that the world will endure when the collapse in the value of the gigantic debt that hangs over the world takes place, I cannot do otherwise than recommend to all the formation of private savings in gold and silver coins, since these metals have always been throughout history the lifesavers of those who possessed them. Such is my vision of the dawn that awaits the world. Hugo Silanus Price.